This is the 8Bitdo Ultimate Controller, and it is the best controller out on the market for the Nintendo Switch. Let's go ahead and start with the box and the technical specs of this thing, and then we'll go ahead and take the Nintendo Switch Pro controller and compare it to the 8Bitdo Ultimate Controller. Starting off, as you can tell on the box, is the controller itself. 8Bitdo Ultimate Bluetooth Controller, Switch, Windows, contents, the controller, the charging dock, and the receiver, which we'll get into all of that in a bit. On the back, you see some more specs, like this works with the Switch 3.0 and above, as well as Windows 10 and above, and it also works on the Mac, but we're not going to talk about that. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and compare the 8Bitdo Ultimate Controller to the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, which I think is the best Switch controller on the market before the 8Bitdo one. As you can tell, the buttons on the front are the same layout. You got the A, B, X, Y, and all the same facets. Then you've got the two joysticks in the same position. Then we've got the D-pad, which is very comfortable. I think the D-pad on the 8Bitdo is way better than the D-pad on the Pro Controller. Then in the middle, you've got what looks to be the plus and minus, which is normal, and then a capture and a home button and the star and the checkered, I don't know what to call it, as well as 3 lights down below and a switcher between modes or profiles for the controller. Then at the top you see the charging port as well as the sync button. The L and the R are in the same place, and R2 and L2 are basically ZL and ZR. And then on the back you notice 2 buttons which are programmable. We'll also talk about that in a little bit, so bear with me there, as well as a Bluetooth to 2.4G switch. And then below that is where the pins connect to the dock and charge it. And on the very bottom, you still have those 4 dots to tell you what controller it is on hooked up to the system. The buttons on the 8Bitdo Ultimate Controller do feel a little different, but it's not in a bad way. The Pro Controller buttons are more flat, whereas these are more convex, which is kind of interesting, as well as it looks like the buttons are a little smaller and maybe a little closer together, which is noticeable probably if you're flipping back between each controller. However, if you're going to sit and play with it for a long time, you're not going to notice it. But one thing I do notice is the D-pad and how it is definitely a little bit farther away from the joystick on the 8Bitdo controller, which is totally amazing. This D-pad feels really good. It definitely feels better than the Switch one. However, I will say that the Switch one works really pretty good on the Pro Controller, but I do think 8Bitdo has the Pro Controller beat on their D-pads for sure. Next, we have to talk about the Hall effect joysticks here, and this is probably the best and biggest upgrade that this controller has. This has magnets inside of it.
Magnets, how do they work?
That actually keeps the joystick from touching the outer edges, which means it's less likely to drift, which if you know anything about Nintendo, their Switch is known and their joysticks are known for drifting, which is because they rub against each other and then they ended up breaking or wearing down over time and you start to get that drift. The home button and the capture button throw me for a loop on this controller though. The star in the middle is actually the capture button, and the star is not the home button. It takes me a little bit to get used to, but the checkered kind of button at the top with the light around it is actually the home button. Moving on to the L and the R button, I did notice they stick out a little bit more than the Pro Controller. However, they're actually a lot thicker, but a lot shorter as well. So as you can see, compared, it makes it probably about the same amount of space to click on it, but it isn't as long as the Pro Controller. But when you're talking about the triggers, they travel a lot farther, and I believe they're analog triggers, but I don't think the analog works with the Switch because it just thinks it's a Pro Controller when it's hooked up. So do with that as you will, but I like the feel of the triggers. They feel really nice. That long pull feels nice. And you can actually fix that with the app. And when you're working on the profiles It's actually kind of interesting how this works. And then flipping over to the back, you notice those two kind of paddle type buttons. Those are really nice. They're nice and clicky, but I do like these a lot better than I do the paddles that are with the Xbox Elite controller. Even though they don't come off, they actually feel a lot better. There's not as much movement, and I think they're in a great spot for your hand. We've talked about the controller, but let's go ahead and move to the dock, which has some really nice features. First off, when you put the controller on the dock, it really clicks in very nicely, and it just kind of settles down onto the dock to charge. And if you flip this over, there is actually a hidden compartment on the bottom, which is for that 2.4 wireless adapter that is USB. So when you're not using it, just store it back under there and put that little cover back on, and you are none the wiser. Also, there's a nice little light bar once you plug it in and plug the controller in. It kind of glows. It's a really nice touch that I like right there. And it has a rubber feet to keep it from moving around, as well as USB-C. No more of that USB micro crap. I'm over that. I think we should stop using that. It does not come with a USB brick though, however, which is kind of a bummer. But I do just plug mine into my dock and have it sitting next to it. Earlier I mentioned that the 8BitDo Ultimate controller has multiple profiles, and you can actually download the app and modify things. You can actually map the buttons to different things. The buttons on the back, those paddles you can add to be whatever you want. You can add triggers. You can do turbos. There's a bunch of little things you can add to those if you would like. One thing that the Switch Pro controller is lacking is grip. On the sides, it's not really there, and it's actually kind of slick now that I think about it. However, this grip is actually pretty interesting and is rougher than I thought it might be, but I do think it's nice. It really feels like the Xbox Elite Pro 2 controller, or whatever that thing's called. After talking about everything that I've lined up, we've got to mention that this thing is $70, which is actually the same price as a Nintendo Pro controller. Now, normally I would say, go buy that Pro controller. It's from a first-party company. You're gonna have great success with it. But I think this actually rivals it and is a little bit better. There's good and bad with this thing. It's missing NFC. The rumble's not as great as you would like it to be. So take it as you will. If you're interested, go ahead and grab one and test it out for yourself and let me know as well. But I'm gonna get out of here. I've got some more games to play, so check that video out if you haven't already. But this thing is really cool. I love the look and feel of this, and if for whatever reason this is dead, picking this up feels like no different. So I could really change these for the most part and not even know anything different. Check that video out. I'm gonna get out of here.